highest teaching honor, the Distinguished Teacher Award, and his Legions of Fame. He's a busy guy, but he always has time for students and a good story. We are very fortunate to have him with us this afternoon. So strap yourselves in and enjoy a great lecture. Larry?
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is only with very great discipline that I actually don't say good evening, ladies and gentlemen, since I've entered this room so many times and began a class with that phrase. It is certainly my pleasure to be with you. I deeply appreciate the invitation from the Faculty of Engineering. The first time I walked into a lecture theater at the University of Waterloo and said, let's talk about the economy, was September 1981. So I will begin my 43rd year as a continuous serving faculty member in September. Coming up, thank you. Well, that's applause for not getting hit by a bus, so, you know. But when I say I'm glad to be here, I am really glad to be here, or anywhere in particular. So, of course, I want to talk about the economy. This is the room to talk about the economy. And that's what I want to do. The title for the talk is Uncertainty in Every Front. I want to talk about all the degrees of uncertainty affecting the economy. I want to talk about it right immediately. I want to talk about the medium term. And of course, I want to talk about the long term. Because, oh yes, and I like young faces, so I'm going to really talk about the long, long term. But it is about context. It's about a global economy. Some of you already know about this. So let's start with where we would normally start. Now, of course, I would normally start with for most of you, overheads. Some of you still remember overhead machine. The University of Waterloo, against my strenuous objections, has retired all these machines. Nobody would know how to maintain them, even if they did not. So let's start with the immediate economy. Recession or not? Well, of course, let's be very clear. So you didn't think I was not going to do that. So let's make it a little bigger. Yes, I know. I'm a creature of habit. I'm not suddenly about to I don't have to learn new stuff. What you see on the screen is quarterly figures of the gross domestic product, real corrected for inflation. You're supposed to know what that means, so I'm not doing a pop quiz, but I am tempted. I'm simply going to restrain myself. The bar we're most interested in is in the lighter gray bar, which is showing you real GDP, just exactly as the logo says. And you will see the pandemic. I should not have to say where was the pandemic. You should be able to see it very clearly. That was a sharp and immediate health emergency contraction in economic activity in the country. And of course, you also know what's supposed to happen when the economy goes into that sudden free fall, when that contraction is not intended by public policy, not by the Bank of Canada, not by the Government of Canada. We have, unfortunately, as soon as this happened, the difficulty of having no precedent for it. You see, the difficulty is with my beloved mathematical models, which are supposed to predict the economy, and which do so with great accuracy, notwithstanding what the media tells you about my beloved models. The only difficulty is we do not have historical information for how an economy responds in the middle of a pandemic, because we've never had one in the post-war period. We've had them before, but that is absolutely irrelevant. It is, 1918. It is already almost still a pre-industrial society. The majority of the population, 1918, in North America is working on the farm. We can't possibly use that experience to infer it to what's going on now at all. Yet, your classes, those of you who fell into my clutches, and your course notes, if you still have them, tell you exactly what was supposed to happen. So the textbooks apply. Your governments looked at the textbooks, and when I say governments, I mean the federal and provincial governments. This had nothing particularly to do with political persuasions, and different governments of different political orientations did similar things, and similarly they did this around the world. It was really a fairly straightforward issue. Private demand is dropping like a stone because you are trapped in your house for good reasons, and you therefore cannot spend money. And even though you try to spend money online, your ability to spend money online does not compensate for the fact that you couldn't go anywhere, couldn't travel anywhere, and couldn't come to the University of Waterloo for a reunion. So for all of those reasons, What the government needs to do, and what the textbooks always say, is they lean against the direction of the private marketplace. The private marketplace is contracting. The public marketplace will therefore expand. So government spending rose sharply. Now, as you know perfectly well, because you can see it from the screen, does economic policy work? Now, that was a trick question. This is where you nod yes, because the answer is yes, not even a question about it. Look at the rapid snapback. Now, notice, that was surprising. It was surprising that you could pump back that economy, even though, we're going to look at employment in a minute, there are literally several extra million people out of work. That is really remarkable that it works that well. Even I was surprised, not that it worked, but the speed with which it worked. Notice that we're actually going to have a dip in the GDP, but it's a dip, and that is quickly recovered. Now, to the vexed question. Of that stimulus money, government spending, which rose dramatically, of that government spending, how much was wasted? Well, without a doubt, some of it was wasted. Yes, some of it was wasted. Now, but let's just notice one or two things before you think, stupid government wasting your taxpayers' money. Now, most of the time it wasn't your money they were wasting. It was money that was called into existence in the magical confines of the central bank, which is what's supposed to happen, too. The central bank did what it's supposed to do, which is go tap on its computers, and then money appeared in your bank account, right? So I didn't take it from you to, if I took money from you and gave it to this person, from an employed person to an unemployed person, for example, what good does that do? Because then you stop spending and you resume spending, so we have to throw extra money into the system, and that's a matter of going tap, and the money appears. Right out of the textbooks, ladies and gentlemen, you know that. Some of you have been exposed to that textbook or the course notes, which are a simulation thereof. Now, as part of all of that, there is no doubt some of it was wasted. One, because the mathematical models don't apply. What we would have liked to be able to do, the central bank certainly wanted to do it, was to be able to go to the models and say, how much money should we put in? It was always going to just be an approximate number, not an exact number. But right now, we don't even have an approximate number to deal with. So your house is on fire. The firefighters arrive. Now, I have trouble imagining you standing in your front yard with the firefighters there and the hoses, your roof is ablaze, and saying now to the firefighters, don't use too much water. Do you understand? Do you understand? I'll have water in the basement. You're damn right you'll have water in the basement. But as a practical matter, I don't think you would have done that. So your government overdid it. Now, we know it overdid it, but in retrospect, at the time it's happening, we do not know. We do not know. These stares have been tormenting me for years. What we do not know, did not know at the time that they were overdoing it. So they erred on the side of caution. Your house is on fire. The houses around the world are on fire. So you pour money into the system and hope the textbooks are right. They are. Now, of course, once you pour all that money in, you might fault your government for responding to the new conditions more slowly than they could have. And that might be me. But the truth is, should this ever happen again, let us hope not, we now have benchmarks to know how to spend that money more wisely. So it's as simple as that. Now, again, we want to get to long-term economy, so we're going to move fairly quickly, ladies and gentlemen. Before we move away from the GDP itself, let's look at one other measurement. I have a whole bunch here. That's why we have a technician sitting here in case that machine stops working, because then they'll make the other machine work. Of course, you have to correct for population. So the figure on the screen is, again, real GDP corrected for inflation. Yes, today's inflation too. And you will see that the GDP per person, which is also a relevant observation, and of course, a proxy for the standard of living. Now, of course, you can see again the sharp decline, which is the pandemic. What is really scary, to just give a sense of the difficulty that the pandemic was challenging us, you do not need really any economics at all to look at that screen and say, yo, pandemic. It's like that brutal. And the threat of it getting worse focused everyone's attention on my textbooks. I had to slip that in there. Just, do you understand how, when you've been teaching something for 40 years, the ability to say, I told you so, are some of the Some of the sweetest, yeah, well, there are some of the sweetest words in the English language, I swear. Now, so of course, the key thing is also your standard of living. Again, it's a crude proxy, but it is a proxy at least. So what has happened is the economy, your real standard of living per person fell on average. Now that's of course because some Canadians struggled badly and most of us simply kept trundling along. But when we look at the arithmetic average, that's the result you get. So as of the most current figure, which is the one on the screen, we're back to where we were before the pandemic. We're not ahead of where we are. So if you don't feel richer than before the pandemic, you are quite right. That is, now by the way, there was this small dip. There is always, as you can see, some variation in that number. Some of that is statistical noise as you try to measure something as complicated as the economy. So from that point of view, it is still a good news story. Economic policy works. The standard of living is back to where it was before the pandemic. Output is higher, but then the number of people in Canada is higher. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes as well. So that's all like fine, positive stuff. Now, the other figure to look at, which is the one that in fact really motivates your government, which is the one on the screen, which I've been showing you for decades. If you do have your course notes, you'll find the employment trends within them. This is, of course, the number of people working in the country. Again, can you see the pandemic, he said rhetorically. But that's actually the point. Again, a severe, that's an off-the-cliff thing. I don't like that god-awful media phrase, oh yeah, snap back. Well, it did snap back. It fell off a cliff. Yes, that's a cliff by any, look at the descent. Project that forward, you have a depression. So, as a result of that, the economic policy. Did it work? I don't know, gentlemen. I don't know, ladies and gentlemen. Of course it worked. Now, it doesn't work instantly. You can't bring all those jobs back because, of course, we had a large number of people in hospitality and food services that were furloughed, and they're sitting at home because we have to cook for ourselves. I found that the most stressful part. Well, we did, really and truly, to go from, prizing restaurant meals and eating a disproportionate share, even though food is so expensive, by having paid somebody else to prepare it. Thank goodness I don't have to do that anymore. I'm getting tired of that. This number, is as of the last month. I'm not bringing you bogus stats here. They're 4 days old. These are the most current stats that are available, which means as of the last month for which we have data, the employment in Canada is at a historic high. Now, I don't know you're Canadians. And I've been in this room and I've done this before. So I still get little caveat thoughts rattling through your minds that you are not, there'll be a Q&A, a chance for a Q&A, so just save up. But before you ask this question, let us try to get at least some of the cliches, myths, and goofy stuff that I've been railing against for decades. Please stop understanding your economy from the media headline services, or now, in the modern way, your favorite blog. Blog's a wonderful word, isn't it? Blog, fog, smog. They have a commonality to them in how they sound, and much of the content is of the same bug-like content you would expect. In any event, so that number, historic number of people working in this country, and by the way, that rate of job creation is one of the highest as it's been since 1960 in the industrial world. We are a job engine machine. It is one of the things that we do particularly well and have done it year in and year out and year in and year out. Recessions come, employment falls, our employment snaps back faster, including faster than the United States. We edge out America in its job creation. We do that consistently, although to a small margin. And with respect to the rest of the industrial world, the mature industrial world, we leave them all in the dust. The only few countries that have ever rivaled that rate of growth, but not over that length of time, of course, is the People's Republic of China. But they were actually, will you keep in mind, starting from a relatively small base of industrial employment. And now they're growing at the rates of mature economies. We'll talk about that with a little time in a few minutes. So the employment is at a historic high. So let's get rid of the mythology. Yes, it's at historic highs, but all the government did was hire mobs of public servants, and so that's why it's at a record high. All those blood-sucking civil servants. Do keep in mind I'm one of them before you agree with that thing. And of course, that's simply not wrong. Yes, public sector employment rose over this period of time. The population rose, and don't you think we should have a few more nurses? Well, and I'm the guy who oh goodness, to be in a room where almost everyone is younger than I am is so depressing. Anyway, for those of us who are a little older rather than a little less young, you will understand, and I think it is fine that we have nurses. I'm never going to let them get their hands on me, but I like the fact that they're nurses for other people who may need them. So it is not disproportionately public sector employment, and all those numbers are in the public domain. Yes, I know, but then, okay, they're private jobs, but then that all means they're part-time jobs. You know, the junk jobs at McDonald's and, no, they're not. Full-time, private sector employment also risen. Part-time employment rose also, but after all, 40% of people work part-time because they want to. And this is a country that is rich enough where if you choose not to work full-time, you have that option and you're not impoverishing your family. Now, the other 60% of the part-time people are waiting to work full-time, and we certainly notice that, but that has not been a disproportionate increase in part-time employment. And by the way, most of the industries in the country have also had surging employment. And of course, the only big industry that's had the biggest adjustment effect has, of course, been tourism and hospitality. Because, of course, it fell like a stone. Now it's had high rates of increase, but that's merely because it's doing all the catch-up from all the closed restaurants and other entertainment facilities. So again, it's broad-based by industry, broad-based by men and women, broad-based by young and old. Broad-based, it is a sweet picture. And I can't stop there, because I'm going to say, but I am an economist after all, and proud of it, by the way. And there's an except coming. Because, those firefighters and all that water, and you, even though you didn't say, no, don't use too much water, you were thinking, oh dear, it will put the fire out. Well, what's my basement going to look like? What are the disadvantageous effects of all that spending? Look, let's be clear. The disadvantageous effects are nobody's surprise. Don't say the Bank of Canada was, surprised. The Bank of Canada knows more about money creation and inflation than anybody else does in the country. And don't even say that the Minister of Finance or the Deputy Minister of Finance are surprised. Look, nobody is surprised except a few idiot journalists. Because you know what has to happen. There is still constrained supply. Constrained for a whole bunch of reasons. Demand is now rapidly pumped back up with all that money. And you know what you're going to have with demand rising so sharply and rising way faster than supply could possibly rise. Even when we recreate stuff, we're going to have, of course, is inflation. The core rate, which excludes volatile food and energy, is the light gray line. The solid gray line is the consumer price index. That's also called headline inflation. That's the rate of inflation you face directly when you enter the stores. Now, as you can see, leading up to the pandemic period, we were in the sweet spot. More than a decade's worth of stable inflation. Boy, no, it's not amazing. Economic policy works. That was the goal of the Bank of Canada, using the normal tools. It got inflation exactly where it wanted it, so low you didn't react to it. That is the operational definition of what they view as the desirable rate of inflation. It is so low that when you think of your wage increases, you do not have a wicked thought that you want to screw your employer over because you need to recapture lost purchasing power. It's a rational impulse, except, of course, it will add to the inflationary pressures. So when it's at 2%, you walk in the store, buy something, don't buy something, don't delay, don't buy it in advance, buy it when you want it, because you're pretty sure it'll be affordable the next year. Well, we're not there anymore. Now, if you only knew how satisfying it is to be in a room with people who are not all 20. If you only knew. If you only, I'm not being funny at all. When I'm standing in the theater, I've got to talk to a group of 20-year-olds, and we're talking about this subject, I actually have to say, once upon a time. Because now they look at that number, and that's a number that we need to address. The Bank of Canada is already raising interest rates, we're going to talk about in a moment. I mean, we have a standard tool. The bank said that when they were increasing the money supply to deal with the pandemic. They said, yeah, okay, inflation may happen, but we have a tool, we'll fix it. Yes, well, they fixed it before. And those of you who aren't all 20, you will remember that figure. See it? Around 6. 6. Those of you of mature years, you know that there was a time in this country where the government and the Bank of Canada would a happy dance if inflation was 6%, when it was, once upon a time, it was more than 10%. Like, really and truly, I say that, and some of the students look at me like he's finally lost it kind of look on their face. And I have to show them the long-term historic data. So that's a serious problem to be addressed. We're going to talk about why it's a serious problem to be addressed, needs to be addressed, is being addressed. Principally, of course, by the primary anti-inflationary agency, which is the central bank of the country. Inflation's risen in most of the industrial world for the same reasons. So if you think this is uniquely Canadian stupidity, this is not. This is global stupidity, or the anticipated side effect of a policy to deal with the unprecedented circumstances of a public health emergency and to prevent a depression from ensuing as a result of the fact that we're isolated in our homes. So that is half the previous peak of my teaching career. So I look at it, got to be addressed. I don't look at it with a panic. It's, a problem to be considered. You will see the core rate, which excludes food and energy. We're going to talk about food and energy in a couple of minutes, so hang on. It's basically lower because you will expect it to be lower. It's also tracking downwards. Now, for the last figures, it stopped falling. You see, the previous numbers, employment at record high, output rising, no sign of a recession yet. Bank of Canada is not overly happy, right? You see, it wants you to pull back your spending. It raises interest rates to hit you in the head with a little stick. Stand down from your spending. No, not stop. Don't postpone your spending for 20 years. Just give it a rest for a few months. Let your plastic stay in your pocket. Don't buy so much. Just relax. Relax. Be calm. But some of you who kept working during the pandemic, your bank accounts are stuffed with cash. You're so sick of being at home. You're so sick of looking at your family. Delete that. You want to get out and about. You want to spend. So the truth is, consumer spending last quarter. So as you saw from the previous slide, first quarter, 23, economy grew strongly. It had stalled for one quarter, and the bank thought, goody. End of 22, economy pause. Good, we want pause. We don't actually need shrinkage, just you, calm, and it'll be okay. No, well, yes, except now, and this new year began in 23, you went back to the shopping malls and shopped till you dropped, and of course then there was the demand for Canada's exports, which rose, which is normally good news, except at this particular circumstance when you want everyone to be calm and quiet down and stop spending so much money and ease the price pressure, that would be okay. Yeah, well, it's not happening. Hasn't happened. We know that monetary policy works with a lag, rising interest rates until you decide to rein in your spending. So, what's the bank's response to these lags? Well, increase the interest rates and wait, increase the interest rates and wait, increase the interest rates and wait. It's iterative, more iterative now than it is normally, because again, the mathematical models are not working all that great. They still aren't working particularly well. But your heart is hard, and you are determined, and the reno that you began during the pandemic is only half finished, so you now have to finish it. You tell yourself, yes, well. Remember the stick? Okay, we'll use the bigger stick. How big does your mortgage renewal payment have to go? So you go, now we're getting too close to home. But I'm sorry, operationally, that's the point. Have your credit card balance ballooned, and then you look at the interest rate they're actually charging, and then you have your mortgage renewal. A large number of you are floating mortgages, and because of the way floating mortgages are structured, they don't immediately begin rising. But they're about to a significant degree. Now, but to a significant degree, not to unprecedented mortgage rates. 81, 82. Mortgage rates hitting 15%. Yes, that'll cold your heart. Here, actually, mortgage rates, which are rising, would have a significant, very large increase in your monthly payment as a percentage, except, of course, mortgage rates are about what they were for most of the post-war period today. So my parents bought their house with today's interest rates and managed to do so. So my heart doesn't exactly bleed for you. Does mean 1 week in Florida instead of 2. I'm sorry, but those are, let us be clear, we are a rich society. This in no way makes light of the fact that there's a very large number of Canadians who are struggling severely. And I'm not forgetting about them. But we also have to look at the overall picture for the economy. And for most of us, we will absorb those mortgage rate increases. Now, some of us look mature enough to have paid off their mortgages already. Unless you remortgaged for the reno, but we'll forget that for a minute. Which means you may, of course, having gotten this bonanza, rapid increase in prices, in house prices, while you paid really quite low mortgage rates. Remember, actually, mortgage rates variable actually dipped to barely over 1% per year. It's a steal, and you know it. And I'm telling your children about it, and why their house is unaffordable, and why you will go back to your parents or grandparents and say, guys, because you have this bonus, and I can't afford a house, so I'm gonna live in your basement. Yeah. Me and my curious companion and our 3 dogs, unless you can help with the down payment. Not as funny as you may think. Now the laughter is nervous laughter. People who know I'm not scamming you with that possibility. So interest rates rise, trying to get the slowdown. Let's just conclude the picture quickly of the other relevant factors. Here is the rate of inflation over time, just a slightly longer time frame. You will see the stability. This is, again, the headline rate, not the core rate. And then you see the spike up. Again, it did not go out of control because the policy went into reverse. So down and now stalled. Do we need a recession to bring it down altogether? Don't know. Some commentators are telling you, yes, we'll need one. They will tell you that every inflationary bust out since the Second World War was ended with a recession. We have no example in the post-war period of the so-called soft landing, where the economy stabilizes, doesn't grow much, employment stabilizes, and the prices come down. The only difficulty with that observation is the situation is so unprecedented that it's not clear that old rule will apply. Simple as that. See, this having to tell you that these are such uncertainties is unpalatable to me, because I've been able, most of the past decades, to be able to describe the economy and its future course with reasonable accuracy and reasonable confidence. And given that I've done it so loud and publicly so often, you know that I've normally been right. Well, I can't lie in front of this audience. That's, it gives me some satisfaction and a little scary too. So, there's one other issue we need to talk about with respect to the effect of those interest rates and whether indeed they are going to set off a recession or not. And this, of course, is a rather relevant point. And that's the degree of Canada's indebtedness with respect to competing countries. And as you can see, we're at the top of the list. Now, that's not all the countries of the industrial world, but that's enough countries of the world that are our distinguishing characteristics. And there they are. We are one of the most indebted nations of the mature industrial society, which means when interest rates rise, we are particularly vulnerable. So, warning, warning. Danger, danger. There is uncertainty. This is not a forecast about a recession. There is a clear likelihood it could occur given our degree of indebtedness. Now, before you Canadians, you uncharacteristically think of yourselves as crazed shoppers, born to shop, you have forgot what country you're in. That is the motto of the United States, not you. One of the primary reasons that level of indebtedness is so high, in particular compared to, obviously, those comparable nations, is your mortgages. And why is that? Because your house prices rose faster than all the other countries in the industrial world, including the United States. So if you had an American house, on average, it rose less rapidly than Canadian houses. So Canadian housing has become abnormally expensive, increased at an abnormally high rate compared to our peers. And your response, remember the employment rate? People who are employed think they should have houses. Even young Canadians who are employed think they should have houses. So they run out and buy houses at a very high rate. Now, there's a whole bunch of reasons why the housing supply is constrained when it shouldn't be, and that's a whole other argument I'm not going to touch this afternoon. But just notice that that demand for housing is a reflection of a high standard of living and a high rate of employment. And then we have the constraints on housing, which limit us. So housing price is expensive, a lot of mortgage debt. That's a primary reason why that number is so high. And it's a primary reason why we are particularly affected by interest rates. Now, the Bank of Canada cautions about that, but awkwardly, and I don't have to be awkward, I don't care about awkwardness. I've been awkward all my life, I'm going to stay awkward. Awkwardly enough, that level of indebtedness means that the interest rate tool got a leverage in this country. So before you read the blog that says, Bank of Canada's lost all its influence. Raising interest rates. Inflation hasn't come down quickly. Don't forget that leverage. The bank has all the tool it needs, and it does not face the electorate. It does not have a minority government to cope with. It answers only to the textbook. Do you know how? Do you know? I'm sorry, that comforts me to tell you the truth. It does. You should notice, as I have told you before in this room, that even though the government of Canada, since this is a democracy after all, has the authority to instruct the Bank of Canada to do something, it is a democracy after all, and this is the central bank of the country. Yet, it has never done so since the legislation was created. It is considered that it would cause the Bank of Canada's governor to resign should that instruction ever be given. So it's never been given, including by Mr. Trudeau the Elder. And if he wasn't prepared to brave the central bank, Just restraining myself. I began my career as an economist working for the Prime Minister's office, for a study mandated by the Prime Minister's office, I should say properly. And right now, the primary research I'm doing for the Government of Canada, I can't believe that it's still the same Prime Minister's name when I began my career as a public servant. If I look a little phased out, sometimes I don't know what year it is. So, the bank has the tools to respond. Uncertainty, maybe a recession, maybe not. What I will tell you is they'll bring inflation down. With your active cooperation, smoothly. If you resist, putting people out of work. Blunt tool. Now remember, blunt tools work. I can't do brain surgery with a blunt tool, but if I want to render you unconscious, a blunt tool will work. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, again, it can sound funny, but that's actually the reality of the thing. Now, I do not want to leave us in this short-term focus. I might if there were no young faces in the room, but I owe it. We owe it to our children. So, in particular, because there are so few of them. Oh, yes. Now, let's look at the medium and longer term future of the country. You read the intro to the remarks this afternoon. Uncertainty, future of the economy, immigration, population growth, and the vexed question, he said to a pack of engineers. Will technology save us? Now, on the latter question, we now have a new answer. Technology isn't going to save us. It is going to destroy us. On a parallel threat equal to the pandemic or climate change, said people who have never read a book outside their own narrow technical specialization. Yes, I'm talking to you, Jeffrey. And you know what, Jeffrey, we're going to talk about in a few minutes. I want to look into the future. I cannot look into the future without addressing that particular question. My students lay siege to my office with their questions about digital agents. We'll get to that in a minute. Let's do one thing at a time. That extremely high rate of employment growth in the country is paralleled by another Canadian extraordinary record, and that is the rate at which our population has been rising. Our population is one of the most rapidly rising populations in the world. It is an odd claim to fame, which one might not have expected. So, the population of Canada, and by the way, I don't mean for like 2.5 minutes, I mean over more than a decade, has been rising 50% faster than the United States. Now, since I'm not, I think, in a room of artsies, an increase in a percentage, a 50% difference in the rate is like rather startling. Europe is not even in competition with us. Europe, many of the main European countries are already shrinking. Japan is rapidly shrinking. We got a housing shortage in Canada. Japan, at this moment, 11%, at least 11% of its entire housing stock is vacant. Well, yes, because there's people shrink, houses don't. Houses go, well, okay, then emigrate to Japan if you're having trouble getting a house that you can afford. Send your kid there. Like literally, people are inheriting vacant houses and don't want them because there's taxes and maintenance. They can't rent it because there's no Japanese people to do so. This is not a small point. To the young people who are in this room, one of the distinguishing characteristics of this century, the ones that they will live to see the end of, I won't. Some of you won't either. But I'll be sitting in heaven. And I'm quite prepared to say, I told you so, if you screw something up. But for the children in the room, exceptional as they are in this country already, the slowing of the birth rate in the entire industrial world, the fact that almost certainly in 2023, 2025, certainly before 2030, if none of the trends change, if there's no particular reason to expect them to change, the population of the planet will hit its peak and thereafter decline. What the environmentalists recommended when I'm an undergraduate, and it's happening. Now, the social consequences of that happening are really quite startling. Want a startling number that gives you a sense of flavor of the challenges facing the planet in the next century, in this century, is the fact that our birth rate is below replacement, as it is in most mature industrial states, as it is in Korea, as it is in Japan. And then there's China, where the birth rate has now fallen to 1. Number of children per woman of childbearing years, 1. Chinese women are looking at their male companions across the dinner table and saying to themselves, okay, I'll replace myself. And you are toast. Unless, well, yes, laughing in the graveyard, unless, and assuming nothing changes. I mean, we have death rates, they're well counted. We have the birth rate, well established, reported by the Chinese government, and all the evidence says these numbers are accurate. Now, measuring the population of China is a bit of a challenge. Last time China took a census, it took 30 million census takers, as many people in the country to count the number of people in China, just because of the scale of the country. But even accounting for all of those imperfections, if the birth and death rates in China do not change, by the end of the century we're in, years that the children may live to see, the population of China will be 700 million. It is currently 1.4 billion. Half of China disappears. You want vacant houses? You can buy a whole street in China. This is an enormous challenge. Sure, it's certainly an enormous challenge to China, as it is to Korea, as it is to Japan, as it is to the primary European states, as it is to Russia. You know what Russia's solution is, of course. I'll get to that in a minute. Can't do everything at once. Aren't you careful? We'll have a tuition bonus, for which I'm infamous. And some of you know what that means, right? So, and where does Canada stand? Well, our birth rate is roughly at the European stage, which is not quite as bad as in China. And we're growing so rapidly. By the way, the Canadian rate of growth is now rivaling that of the entire world. There are a few countries that outdo us. India continues to outdo us, which is moving, which will be shortly, or is already, the most populous country on the planet, and it has taken that title away from China. And we're growing, not because we're having a lot of babies. You are European baby averse, and not quite to the degree of the Chinese, but at least adverse enough. And we say to the world's talent, come. And they are. The only reason that employment rate has risen so quickly was because of the immigrants, who do in fact get jobs. So that's why there's such high employment levels. That's why it's one of our claim to fame. We welcome the world. We remain one of the few countries in which immigration has not yet been an important issue in a national election. As of the last poll, for the past 15 years, the vast majority of Canadians describe immigrants rather, as making a net contribution to the economy. That is something the public believes that is actually correct. Because not everything they believe is. Well, yes, so it is worth celebrating. But we have to wrap our heads in terms of the future, of what it means to live in a world of declining population on a world scale. While our population, at least for the moment, is growing sharply. Of course, we have a problem with housing. Isn't it surprising? Not. Well, our dopey response to it is fine to say to an immigrant, come to Canada. We have employment. Well, we do actually have employment. Of course, having a place to live might be a slightly bigger challenge than it is. So we do need to address this housing issue. And quickly. Or we will destabilize one of our greatest advantages. So, you know the world is competitive. You know this is a trading nation. You know that 30 pitifully, 35 now, my goodness, I will forget a few billion people. You know that your standard of living rivals those of the best of the industrial world, and it does because you are a major trading nation and have been since the founding of this country, actually before the founding of this country. You're a trading nation. As a trading nation, your degree, your ability to compete, to offer goods and services that the world wants, is more and more a function of the talent that can be deployed. And you now are in the unique and potentially extremely advantageous situation that the world's talent has chosen to come to us. Now, we have to be worthy of that talent. We have to have employment for them. So the government, for example, the recent moves in Ontario, for instance, to make professional qualifications from outside the country recognized more quickly in Canada is, of course, a step in the right direction. So the properly trained people outside the country receive credit when they arrive here in Canada quickly, not after 14 years of relearning, supposedly, what they don't know, which is ridiculous. So we're moving in the right direction. I think that, as you know, I rarely let you know what I'm personally thinking. I think this is a grand opportunity, but it's a high challenge. Live up to the world's talent. And the world has a lot of talent. High bar to live up to when it comes with many, many challenges. And how long this will continue, who knows? So, now the question of uncertainty. We have the uncertainty of the short term and inflation. Of course, I can't tell you how quickly the rate of inflation will come down. That will require me to tell you what is in the head of an imperialist dictator called Mr. Putin. World's food and energy prices, powerfully affected by the war in Ukraine. We are, by the way, at war by proxy. We are. Your government is supporting Ukraine. It's an act of conventional war in Europe, which I must honestly tell you, I never expected to live to see. I never expected to have to even be talking about a conventional war that's killing so many people to no purpose, causing those of my students who are both of Russian and Ukrainian descent extreme. It's difficult. Some of them will not talk about it. It is so painful. Or as one student said to me, only in passing, clearly did not want to talk about it. I understand why. He said that the places of his childhood that he spent with his grandparents in the country in Ukraine, in the countryside of the Ukraine, has been blown to pieces. Also part of our world. So, how much more uncertainty do you want? The unprecedented. I don't like that word. It means I have no historic data. Do you know how that pisses me off? Because I can't put up a slide with historic data because there isn't any when it's unprecedented. I don't know all the challenges that are going to unfold from a shrinking population in the world. And in the countries of our major competitors, by the way, our neighbor to the south, which is ambivalent about immigration, the best way to describe that. And from time to time barely has a functioning government. You want to throw in some more uncertainty? Is that not enough uncertainty? Seems to me enough uncertainty. And last, however, ladies and gentlemen, but surely to goodness not least, it's thirsty work. And certainly not least is your role in all of this uncertainty. Sorry, you're the men and women of technology. You create it, manipulate it, use it, deploy it, torture it on occasion. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. Let's see if tech A applies to problem B, even though it's never applied before. And then use a sophisticated approach of just try to push it in. I've seen you bang on things. When in doubt, take a hammer. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, I know all the engineering jokes there are in the whole universe. It's because you've shared them with me. So don't look at me, but you don't look at with offense. You tell me your own jokes about yourself. You do. You do. I can actually make jokes about almost every profession taught by this university, courtesy of its pointy-headed students, except those about economics, which are beyond the pale. Old question. I was introduced to it as an undergraduate. Very simple question. We already saw, when I'm an undergraduate, that technology was going to replace workers. It has since the beginning of time. Machines mean we can make the same amount of food with fewer farmers. And the number of active farmers in the country, not my family, by the way, they're still farming, has been in long-term systemic decline in this country because you created the machines to get rid of farmers. And food is affordable for most of the industrial world as a result of that. So, nothing new, but technology eliminates work. It should eliminate work. Its role is to eliminate work. Dangerous work, dull work, boring work, brutal work that humans should not be doing in the first place. In one sense, one celebrates this. I stand with the Greek philosopher who said, when the looms, referring to textile looms, when the looms weave themselves, quote, then man will truly be free. Free from the drudgery of boring work. However, sorry, that was a lecture from, God, the 1960s. But, said the instructor, my instructor, works that way, I have to have professors before I get to do this, said, yes, while that on principle is a good thing, what do you do if technology moves faster than we can redeploy the labor? So we got rid of lots of farmers, but we had work for them. China has gotten rid of a lot of farmers, low-tech, not particularly productive farmers, and moved them into industrial employment, a process which is coming to an end as they run out of people, period. But the question is, there's no automatic reason why you will eliminate jobs slower than our ability to create new ones. Maybe you'll do it faster than our ability to create new ones. Who knows? And I know for a fact that when you sit in front of your screens, and when I started teaching, I would have said, in front of your wouldn't have been the word screen. I'm not even going to say the word. It sounds so old-fashioned. You don't think about that global picture. I don't know how you could think about it, by the way. You don't. But I don't know how you could create technology X while thinking, now I better do a cost benefit with respect to this impact on the entire labor market of the planet before I proceed. Your employer, by the way, would love that kind of answer when he asked you to do something. So we create it and hope for the best. And as you can see from the data we've shown you, we have in this country and in many other countries created employment fast enough. And in this country, particularly fast enough. And given how many people come here, that's a remarkable accomplishment. So for all your attempts to save labor, we still hired more people. So, ideal outcome. Until today, it could be argued. Until today. As you certainly know, and on this happy note, we'll conclude. As you know, I'm going to say it. You know what word I'm going to say. The word you've gone from not knowing about like 6 months ago to, school children now are now asking me about Chat GPT. Lord, give us strength to go on. Now, given that I've lived through several technological frenzy, the world has changed, and then it only sort of changes. It would be foolish, of course, to ignore the comments and not think about the ones of the persons who've pioneered artificial intelligence, which of course should really be called machine learning. And they are now delivering themselves of apocalyptic warnings about the extinction of humanity. I just wanted to know about job creation, and now they're telling me the robots are taking over the world. Like really, the leap from one problem to the other is a little breathtaking and rather a jump. Like really, calm yourself. They've said, many of them have said, to rival the existential threat, and it is existential, of climate change, which is a severe problem of encroaching severity in unpredictable timing. But the robots are an equal threat. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen. There is something about that that is simply on its face preposterous and is the result of really smart people, and I've seen this before, of really soft people who stare into screens so long and read not a book outside their narrow domain of expertise. I can understand why. I can understand why if you were a pioneer in artificial intelligence, aka machine learning, why you might really be stressed out to have time to read like other books that have addressed this issue. Maybe psychology. Do you realize that one of the reasons we should not be calling this stuff artificial intelligence is we still do not have an operational definition of human intelligence. So before we figure out that the machine is going to replace you, we should need to find the you part of the you so that we would know what part of the, what part of the machine learning models is reproducing you or replacing you. We simply don't have that information. It's without being able to define your unique characteristics, you're a threat of the robots taking over. Now, let's be clear about one thing for sure, 100% for sure. For sure, artificial intelligence, digital agents certainly have the capability to create great evil. You know that. They have the ability to increase the scale of misinformation on this planet to a great degree. And if you are a pioneer in artificial intelligence, pray you comment on the fact publicly that the greatest immediate threat could be the tech industry for whom you have worked and their endless desire to manipulate your consumer behavior. Awkward, isn't it? So yes, that AI could be used to turn you into a reaction machine. Buy, new model. New model, obsolete, buy. So there are real dangers. For example, I would support a pause in some of the development so we can regulate the manipulation parts of artificial intelligence. Just like really, the internet. Remember the internet? I remember the internet.
3.1.
Windows 3.1. Yes. You see, I remember the internet when it came. I do remember the damn internet when it came. And I remember what I was promised. I was promised that the internet was going to create an informed, literate planet. Yes, I was told that. As humanity's knowledge was going to be at your fingertips. No need, no constraints. Didn't have to be rich, didn't have to afford books. You could go tap on your machine, and you could download Aristotle. You could download every major significant thinker. You could download every economic stat you ever wanted, so nobody could deceive you. Until we discovered you were all so lazy, or at least the people outside this room are so lazy, that they cannot actually use a search engine, so they have to go to a platform. Heaven forbid you should actually have to, go to a website and read it yourself. No, Mother Google has an answer for you. God, that's like your theme music, man. So, real risks of all of this? Ignore the apocalyptic things and deal with the ones that are immediate. Since under some circumstances, it is realistic to imagine how the digital agents will make it impossible to discern truth from falsehood and put in power certifiable lunatics in any country on the planet. That's a danger, for sure. Now, engineering alumni is becoming a little uneasy because we're slightly reaching the time where I should have stopped already. We have run out of time for Q&A, I regret. I must admit, ladies and gentlemen, I view these as extraordinary times. Artificial intelligence, the potential to create wondrous new medical treatments, for example. A solid economy, notwithstanding the temporary inflationary stupidity. Fundamental advantage to Canada of all that talent coming to us, which we need to rise to that talent. A complex set of circumstances. And I wanted to do justice to the complexity. So I regret chewing into a few minutes of the break time, but I felt unable not to address that with the clarity, with at least some clarity. I have the fantasy, please don't disabuse me of it, that unless we, those of us educated, who still value truth and rigor and evidence, it's up to us to guard the world from for those small people. Our job. Not theirs yet. Soon enough, but not yet. That's our job. I must admit, about the future, I remain optimistic. Because when I walk into the theaters at UW, I see the future. And the future's talent is wonderful to look at. So, let's all help it. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.